We're going now. All right, welcome to the 8th webinar for our CYVP program. Today we're going to be talking about how do we continue the effort that you all are either programs that you're implementing, personnel that you've hired as part of the CYVP program, or policies and procedures that you've created. So welcome everyone. Let me see if I can move this to the next one. As always, thank you to our OJJDP partners. This project is supported by their wisdom and support, and the opinions, findings, and conclusions in this webinar do not necessarily reflect those of the DOJ. So again, James Stark, Local Initiative Support Corporation, helping to provide a TTA for the CYVP program. Today's objectives, hopefully at the end of this, you all have more tools to learn about various funding opportunities, about how keywords, requirements, and reviews can help you all in your grant writing. I know we've got about 8 or 9 more months of this grant program. A number of you have asked about additional grant funds that might be able to support this work moving forward through OJJDP and as well throughout other grant sources of funding, federal, state, local, and foundational. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll also utilize Ms. Julie Wartell and her experience as a data guru to help you increase your effectiveness in being able to utilize qualitative and quantitative data to tell the story of the work. A lot of times folks have really great data or somewhat good data and just don't know how to utilize that to be able to tell the story of your work. So we'll share a couple of examples of what y'all can do and should do to be able to tell your story. And we'll also identify key policy and budget decision makers. Sandra Espadas will help us with that. That are both in your schools and in your community that can be and should be regularly engaged as a part of your programmatic sustainability. So you'll hear about different organizations, whether it be in the schools or outside the schools, and why those decision makers are important for sustainability. And Amy, to your question earlier, I know prior to hitting the record button, you were asking about, are these resources going to be available to you online? Yes, they are. So the webinar PowerPoint will be added to our CYVP resource page. If you want to take a picture of that QR code will take you right there, or you can type the link in there, and on the right you'll see what the page looks like. So that website has all of our prior webinars, PowerPoints, knowledge sharing, resource documents, as well as information from our 2 prior convenings. So with that, I'm excited to talk to our guests today. They're going to be talking a little bit about federal programs, data, and relationships. So first, Leonora is going to head us off, and I would encourage you all, please raise your hand in the middle of the presentation, ask questions. We want to make this very interactive. Share some examples of what you all are doing, and questions you have about how do you sustain that work. And of course, we'll stop and answer that question. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Leonora.
Thanks, James. So hello, everyone. So I'm going to start off just by talking about or giving you like the federal perspective. So as you know, during each fiscal year, just based off of funding availability and priorities, federal agencies provide grant funds to organizations and communities to support current initiatives and innovative research. So specifically for OJJDP, we support state, tribal, and community efforts to promote the safety and well-being of youth and to deter delinquency. So in terms of sustainability, looking through the lens of receiving federal funding, I think it is important to think outside the box and look for grant opportunities everywhere. So although some solicitations may not fit your entire program as a whole, you can streamline your program to keep some of those components, because that still indicates sustainability, even if it's in a smaller scope. So part of that is what? Diversifying your funding, especially if a program has more than one site or several staff members or just different aspects to the project as a whole. Diversifying your funding really helps to ensure that partial or smaller parts within your project can still operate if one or more sources of the funding ends. And this allows you time to really locate other financial resources to expand the program back to previous levels without really losing a presence in your community. Next slide. So the CYVP program, as you know, supported a comprehensive effort to address youth violence and victimization through implementing evidence-based prevention, intervention, and accountability efforts, specifically in a school-based setting. And so the goals of that program were to reduce the incidence of school violence, respond to victimization, exposure to violence and trauma, improve school safety and climate, and also prevent violence, delinquency, and victimization within your community. So various available funding opportunities support different aspects of these goals and efforts. So here on this slide, I'll highlight some of, excuse me, OJJDP's fiscal year 2022 solicitations that were released that are aligned with the CYVP programming that presented an opportunity to sustain and enhance CYVP efforts. So the first one I'll talk about is our enhancing school capacity to address youth violence. This supported targeted efforts to address youth violence through implementing evidence-based prevention and intervention efforts in a school-based setting, so K through 12th grade only. That program supported the development and expansion of local programs and strategies to increase school safety by preventing and reducing school violence. And so through that initiative, OJJDP wanted applicants to really focus on a collaborative approach, which is a lot of what you are doing now, between schools and community-based organizations to really develop and implement those strategies. So through that solicitation, they funded 21 sites at approximately $1 million each. The next one is our strategies to support children exposed to violence. So, which is what our CYVP program is under, but it was more, your solicitation was a little more targeted, and our just general CEV programming is geared towards children exposed to violence in homes, schools, and communities. So all of the above. And this solicitation provided funding for communities to develop coordinated and comprehensive community-based approaches to assist children and their families who are exposed to violence, build resilience, and prevent future juvenile violence and delinquency. So funding could be used to provide supportive services for children exposed to violence and to help family serving organizations better recognize and support families at risk for violence. So through that solicitation, we funded 7 sites at approximately $900,000 each. The next one we had this year was our youth violence prevention program. And so the goal of that program was to prevent youth violence, and applicants had to develop and implement a youth violence prevention strategy that was focused and targeted towards middle and high school age youth, and or those youth having multiple risk factors for violence. And so for that one, it was a smaller number. We only funded 4 sites at $250,000 each. And then we also had an arts program for justice-involved youth. This program sought to support and strengthen collaborations between art-based organizations and juvenile justice systems to develop, expand, and enhance effective interventions that provide access to high quality art programs with and for justice involved youth. And through that one, we funded 3 sites at $66,000. And then the last one I'll talk about is just our multi-state mentoring programs initiative. We usually have this one every year. And this program supported the implementation and delivery of mentoring services to youth populations that are at risk or high risk for juvenile delinquency and victimization and juvenile justice system involvement. So I know you're thinking, okay, we're a school district, so we're not necessarily a mentoring program, but if you have a mentoring program in your school, this is a way for you to maybe even partner with a mentoring organization through this type of solicitation. So just trying to think outside the box. Next slide. Oh, I think James, I think I'm going to pass it to you.
Yes, we're tag teaming this one. So in addition to the ones that Leonora mentioned from OJJDP, there's also opportunities for you as a school to also partner with organizations in your community that are doing violence reduction work. One of those grant programs is the Community Violence Intervention and Prevention Initiative. And again, this is an opportunity for schools to partner. It could be with the city, could be community partners to collectively address youth violence. So, if there's an organization that is engaged in Safe Passage program, or even an organization that is focused on connecting young people who have been delinquent or engaged in violence or group violence with positive supports out of school. And it could be in school too, but your schools are going to know oftentimes who those young people are. So you can be a terrific asset to community partners in providing or applying for this grant program. There's other opportunities, and I want to also toss this out to the field too, because I know you all probably know better than even I do about Department of Education grant programs. But one I was just seeing recently was Title 4A of the Every Student Succeeds Act. It's a Stronger Connections grant program, and this provides block grants to states to invest in inclusive and equitable practices that meet the social, mental, and physical needs of the students. So I would encourage you to check with your state Department of Education, get an idea of what's being funded, how they're going to be deploying these grant resources, and see if you all can apply for it. I mean, it seems like it would be a natural fit for many of the programs that you all are doing. There's also the American Rescue Plan Act, the ARPA funding, which designates money to states and communities to fund violence prevention and intervention efforts. Similar to the CVIPI program, which I was talking about earlier, these funds typically will go to either the state or to your local municipality. So there are resources there to address violence and intervention programs. So I would encourage you all to connect with your city leadership and see if they're going to be using ARPA funds and how they're going to be using ARPA funds to address violence intervention programs. The Bureau of Justice Assistance, another one of the OJP organizations, as is OJJDP. They also have a couple of grant programs, the Stop Preventing School Violence grant program, which I think a couple of you have applied to and been successful in receiving funds. They also have funding available for schools to address youth violence. And there is this interesting category, which I found, and I'm like, I wonder if y'all could apply for it. It's called the Burn Discretionary Community Project Funding. And it seems like it's one of those very innovative type of, like, basically asking for communities to be innovative and how do they address violence. So, if you have a really innovative program that you all are either funding through CYVP or because of your CYVP collaboration, you've identified a gap in service that can be addressed, check that out. That might be an opportunity. And of course, you can always utilize us, the LISC team to help you out with that. There was a couple of other examples I haven't put on here that might apply specifically to your schools. One of them I saw was the California Community School Partnership Program, CCSPP. Apparently they have, it's the nation's largest investment, $4 billion, to help high need students through a whole child approach. So it's funding community schools, which I've heard some of you are very interested in. So if you're interested in the community school model, whether it be Lompoc or El Rancho, check that out. And then in Washington, they have under their state education link, they have a homeless education grant. They have an improving teacher and principal quality grant program and a digital equity and inclusion grant program. And also, sorry, one more. They also are funding $13 million using their ARPA funds for community-based organizations to collaborate with Washington school districts to support learning, recovery, and acceleration. So, just I would encourage your grant teams to just check out your state pages, your municipal pages for grant opportunities. And as we move into Sandra's portion, just think about how and who you can contact, because the more folks you are talking about your CYVP work, they might raise some flags and be like, oh, that's a really interesting program that we can fund through this foundation or this grant program. So the more you talk about it and the more you practice talking about it, the more likely you're probably to be able to sustain this work. I'm going to kick it back over to Leonora. Talk about this is important too. How do federal grant programs review your applications? So I'm going to kick it over to Leonora. Yeah. You're muted.
Can you hear me? Okay, so my computer froze, so that's why it happened. So yeah, I will talk about kind of the selection and peer review process. And so, having been in grant review prior to coming to OJJDP, I was in grant review for 5 years at the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. So I do have a good understanding of just the peer review process. And it's generally speaking, it is the same, even though each agency is different. When you're applying to these grant opportunities, the key thing is to read the solicitation and just carefully and all of the requirements. So here at OJJDP, when you're submitting an application, applicants, as you know, if you meet the basic minimum requirements, which is just having a proposal abstract, a narrative, and your budget worksheet and budget narrative, then your application will get pushed to peer review. And so obviously each solicitation has like 5 criteria that you need to discuss with your application. So the first is a description of the issue, and that's where peer reviewers will evaluate your understanding of the program and issue to be addressed. Then you'll have the project design and implementation section, where peer reviewers will evaluate the adequacy of your proposal, including like your goals, objectives, timelines, and milestones, just making sure that it's really in alignment to the scope of the solicitation. Generally speaking, next, we usually have the capabilities and competencies section, where you'll be evaluated on your administrative and technical capacity to really accomplish your goals and objectives. And then we also have the section for data collection as well as your budget. And so I know I have like the percentages up here. It changes. That's why it's really important to just read the solicitation, because different solicitations place a higher or lower value on certain sections. So just make sure that you read them carefully.
And I'm gonna hit a interesting nugget too here, and I'm gonna try to create an interactive opportunity. So whoever wants to answer this question gets bonus points. I don't know what you get bonus points for, but you get bonus points. So if you're putting together your application and you're looking at this, what section do you think you should invest the most time in?
Project design and implementation.
Project design.
Very good, very good. Yeah, a lot of times folks get really into the description of the issue, because that's, you're telling a story about why you need funding. That's very important, but you're exactly right. That project design and implementation, and even the I always screw that up. Capabilities and competencies section are super important. When they're reading the grant program, that's the ones getting the most weight. So good answers, and glad you all are paying attention. You all get bonus points.
And make sure when you're in that section, make sure that you're like hitting on all of the deliverables that are specified in the solicitation. That's really important.
Yep, they're usually laid right there out for you.
Yeah.
All right.
And then this is just a little bit more about our peer review, our review process, just OJJDP, OJP. We are committed to ensuring that a fair and open process for awarding grants. We review applications to just make sure that they're reasonable, understandable, measurable, and achievable, and just really consistent with what we're trying to do, the work that we're trying to fund. So we use external peer reviewers to review these applications.
And one thing to be mindful of as a school district, you probably know a lot of really good organizations in the community that might be very small, that might be like, this is really great, we could do so many things with this funding, but we can't apply because that the information that's being requested is way too much. So, in those circumstances, I'd encourage you as a school department to think about, how can I partner with some of these small organizations to be able to pass through the funding or to support those very small organizations. They're typically often underfunded. These oftentimes grant programs, and not federal grant programs. I'm not saying anything, Leonora, about federal grant programs, but a lot of times the grant, they're very difficult for folks to apply to. So, community organizations, they're small, often Black and brown, just, get frustrated about the difficulty applying for this funding. So again, I'd encourage you as a school to think about how you can support those organizations, as well as, how maybe you can work with larger community-based organizations in your community that can be either school or those larger organizations be a fiscal agent with you to support the work of some of these smaller organizations that are doing great things with some of the youth in your communities. All right, we are now going to kick it over to Julie Wartell. She is one of our experts around how do you use data to tell the story of the work that you all are doing. So, Julie, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I believe I've talked to a couple of you or emailed throughout this project over the last year or so. But today, again, focusing on using data for sustainability of school violence reduction strategies. I guess this is where I say, can you change, or can I control it?
Nope, I'm just slow on the uptake.
I have to rely on you. Okay. So to get started, I'm gonna hope I have the same or better results when I ask a question to the group of around data collection. So, I have some slides ready and preconceived notions about what types of data could and should be collected, but wanted to hear from you all, especially a pretty small group that everyone can have a chance to chat. So what data have you all collected for your projects? Feel free to throw it in the chat if you'd prefer, or just pipe up and throw out some of the types of data that you've collected throughout the project.
Chat seems to be disabled.
Oh,
yeah, James, the chat's disabled.
You're on mute too, James. Oh, we don't read lips, James, sorry.
Oh, I said I will enable chat in 1 second, but since you all are talking, I'm volunteering you all.
Julie, I'll share. We looked at some of the basics like attendance and grades and things like that, but then we've also looked at like during the virtual time that we had some online portals that students and parents and families could log into, and we would look at like the number of login times and things like that to see how often students are getting information, and that helped us determine who we needed to connect with and reach out to more.
That's great. So a combination of that, quantitative existing data as well as some more qualitative, collect data on an as needed basis. Thanks for that.
We've used the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, Swiss data, and the SABRS and ACEs surveys.
Great. So a lot of different surveys that, again, I think there's a combination of those surveys. Some are done on an annual, some on either more or less than that. Is that true, Amy?
You just went to mute, so you might have muted yourself accidentally.
Sorry, I did. Sorry. The Youth Risk Behavior Survey is one that's done through the CDC, and that's done, like, I think once every 2 years.
Okay.
And then Swiss is something that's an ongoing behavior system, sort of collecting like out of school suspensions and different things like that.
Great. Thanks for that clarification. You guys probably all know all those acronyms, and I'm not as familiar with all the different school-related surveys. Rebecca L. I noticed we have 2 Rebeccas, and we can't even say with a K or without. So
we also track whether or not a student is experiencing homelessness, whether or not they are an enrolled or eligible enrolled member of a federally recognized tribe. And then we do, because we're able to access that information through our data system Power School, but then we also track whether or not a student is having transportation concerns, and then whether or not we learn that a student has a probation counselor. So those are a few. We have other things, but those are the main one.
And is that for all students or only only students in certain programs?
So it's all of our students that are in RISE. All students have, whether or not they're an enrolled member of a federally recognized tribe, as well as whether or not they're experiencing homelessness. The transportation concern is not something that's tracked in our main system, and their probation counselor status or juvenile court involved status is not something that's tracked in our main system. We also track, because I think I met with you a few months ago, and we do also track whether or not a student is part of the LGBTQ+ community, but it's not something that we assign to their student ID or even their name. So I'm actually not aware of who on our mentors' caseloads identifies as part of that community. I just have a number.
And I realize, there are a lot of privacy issues. I mean, some people might say that homelessness is also a privacy issue, but, I do a lot of work on homelessness, both here in San Diego, where I'm based, as well as in Boulder, Colorado. And, a lot of discussions about, while there are concerns, the best help can be for personalized, assistance on that. So that's nice.
I should clarify also whether or not somebody is experiencing homelessness, that's identified to us through whether or not they're receiving services through the McKinney-Vento Act. So there are students and families who have declined to be part of that program, but we do know that they're still experiencing homelessness. So we don't track it outside of whether or not they're receiving McKinney-Vento.
Got it. Good to know. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, we'll pick on some of you later. And so then that's the other question is, you have this long list. And again, since I just mentioned Boulder and homelessness, our first part of the project, because it's me and another researcher who does a lot of work in the community, is, what data exists currently? And then the next step is, well, what other data would we want to collect? And I'll go into it a little bit further in terms of, how do you collect the data? Is it possible to collect other data? Sometimes it's just not possible to have the ideal data set, but other times it just takes some creativity in terms of that. So, James, next slide. Thank you. When we think about collecting data, using data, especially to tell the story, and especially to tell the story in hopes of more people, believing in your programs, believing in your strategies, and then funding additional strategies or extending the strategies, that one nice way to think about it is, what data do you have, or what analysis can you do at the school level? And even within that individual school, so, I know across the projects, some are an individual school, others are school districts, but within the school, do you see differences across the grades? Do you see differences between people bussed in or not bussed in? And so there's sometimes a combination of that, the people involved and the schools. But, just like in the crime world, which I have worked in, not doing crime, but analyzing crime for many years, it's that combination of, what do we know about the bigger picture? There are national stats on every city has to report to the FBI about their citywide crime. But we also all know that within cities that crime and violence and other issues vary. So if you can, start at the school level, but then dive into the school. And we have some examples of those coming up. At the incident level, and this isn't necessarily responding to individual incidents. When we talk about data to tell the story, it's always good to have that example of a big incident that was taken care of well, or a big incident to talk about a problem. But it's much more effective to talk about problems in terms of groups of incidents. 75% of our acts, occurs on Friday afternoons. Most of our bullying is happening at the beginning of school year versus the end of the school year. So when we think about incidents, thinking about what is, you have a whole range of incidents that you might be capturing, but what is jumping out at you? What is a small number of something, or a small percentage of something that's accounting for a big part of your problem? The people involved, and that's not just the students, obviously that's, any of the stakeholders, any of the people that either are affected by the problem or problems, or can have an effect on the problem. And that relates to the controllers. And we use controllers in the analysis field as who has any control over people or places or incidents. So, is it teachers in one case, or counselors or another, or security, or maybe the police in the area, or a nonprofit that works specifically with one type of student in your school or in your school district? So again, especially around the people involved, no names, no PII necessarily is needed to describe, we have a certain percentage of students that are experiencing homelessness and have transportation needs, or a certain percentage of kids that are arriving on the school bus are getting bullied. And so that's where it's telling that story of, when you're applying for funding and saying we have this need, highlighting it using actual data. So this is just, kind of that first brush at the types of data. We heard from several of you that included several of these things, in terms of safety data specifically, crime incidents, and those might be within the school. And it's also thinking about, I did some work in the Philadelphia school district with the school district police a couple of years ago. And there was a lot of discussion around, certain schools are in certain parts of the city or neighborhoods that have higher crime. But then when we got to talking, because at their first analysis prior to bringing us in, they just said, we want to look at all crime within, a mile of the school or a half mile of the school. I forget what it was. And we're going to use that to say whether this school has problems. Well, it's like, when I started talking to the folks there, they said, oh, we have certain schools that like 70% of the kids are being bussed in. And that's where it's like, well, then they're not being affected by that neighborhood, which is very different than if kids are walking to school and either witnessing or becoming victims of crime incidents. So crime incidents, calls for service, thinking about one at the school or on the campus, and then two in the surrounding area, but what, percentage of the kids or, crime incidents of cars being broken into in a school parking lot is very different problem than kids getting bullied when they're walking home or kids getting attacked. I worked in Redlands, California. It's a small town in Southern California, east of Los Angeles, that was called Mayberry. I mean, they had that little amount of crime. And so fortunate not to have a lot of violence, they looked at other issues and they surveyed kids. It was a great idea. Blank map. They said, write your path, just draw on your path. How do you walk to school? And then where are you afraid along the way? So put where you're afraid and what you're afraid of. The biggest problem they found were dogs. Loose dogs were what the kids were afraid of. Very different problem, obviously, than getting beat up by fellow students or former students. The school data, lots of different surveys. Some of you talked about the suspensions and expulsions, other school data that's not necessarily, that gives you that picture of what are the staff being trained on. And won't even go down that road about guns and that whole issue. I have very strong personal feelings, but it's that idea of, again, do staff really know what's going on within the schools and the programs that are offered? And how can they support that? Or how can they stand back and let it happen? Student prevention assemblies. A lot of grants, and I worked on a lot of grants across Department of Justice, count things. And so you can say, we held a prevention assembly once a month or once a quarter or 4 times. But really, what is it that you're preventing or training them on? And what are they getting out of it? So having some sort of education part as that data to say, what did you learn at that prevention assembly? And then how does it relate to other data that you might be collecting about if you're trying to prevent drugs? I mean, DARE, hopefully no one's still using DARE because it's been proven not to work to reduce drug use in kids. But, lots of drug-related prevention assemblies, trainings for, since I was a kid, at least, if not before that, and I'm old if you didn't tell by the gray hair, but did that have any effect on kids just having an assembly? So collecting data in addition to just numbers of things that you're collecting, but what's the impact or effect of that? And that's along the programmatic activities as well. And then lastly, and I have a slide coming up to talk a little bit more about surveys and other data to collect out in the community. And it's not all of those. These are just kind of a laundry list of what you might explore. James, did you have any other thoughts or comments on this?
I did, and I put it to us, not to everybody, so I apologize. But one of the points that she was making that I think is spot on is great point about being as specific as possible. A lot of times we talk about this is what the school data is, but if you're a specific program or if you're targeting a program to a specific grade level or within a school, like how is that school different than the other schools, whether it be the challenges or the outcomes of your activities? So if you can be as specific and be like, hey, we implemented this program in 2 schools, and because of that, we've seen XYZ change. That really is helpful to tell your story. And alternatively, if you're having a challenge in that school and can say like, this school has X more issues about bullying than other schools, then you can, be a lot more targeted when you're applying for funding, and whoever's reading the application is well aware that you guys have put a lot of thought into this issue. So just wanted to just highlight that point and say that's a really great point about being as specific as possible.
And on that note, James, thank you for that reminder. When you are comparing schools, if your school has 100 students and the next school has 1,000 students, you want to use rates, not numbers. And so, you know, those 10 incidents of bullying in a school with only 100 kids is a much bigger problem than 20 incidents of bullying in a school with 1,000 kids. And so, especially if you're comparing either within yours or against, you know, of all big schools or of all middle schools or whatever it is, that you want to use the rate per number of students if your data is about students, or per total population if it's incidents around that's affecting staff or others as well. And the next, if you click, James, it's got a question there. We've talked about data, but I don't know. I'm going to open it up again to say, besides the data that you've already mentioned or that I've listed here, are there any other non-traditional types of data that you're collecting or that you'd like to collect? Okay, I'll let you think about that. We're going to have time at the end to come back to these as well. So, you know, how do we collect data that's not in a system? Some schools and school districts have lots of great systems that have that data that we can just go to, and sometimes needs a little cleaning, but analyze that data. Oftentimes, whether it's schools or crime or things in the community, that's like, I wish we knew this. So how do we go out and get that data? And this is, again, is a bit of a laundry list. It's what's been used in community violence prevention and problem solving over the years. But, you know, if the problems that you're identifying are around certain places that kids are worried or scared about walking home or walking to the rec center or walking to a program, you know, going out and doing an environmental survey or a site survey and saying, well, what is it about it that's scary? Is it because they have to go home in the dark and there's no lighting? Is it because they have to go stand at a bus stop that's actually at a very busy intersection? So, you know, going out, if problems arise around places, an environmental survey is really nice way to collect that additional data. You know, also maps of that. Where are things happening? And you can have a map within a school that, you know, it doesn't have to be fancy. You don't need fancy GIS necessarily to say, within our school campus, are more of the drugs, the bullying, whatever it is, are they happening in the classroom? Are they happening in bathrooms? Are they happening out on the field? Because you'll have different strategies. If it's happening in the classroom, is a very different problem in many ways than if it's happening way out on the edge of campus after school. So, you know, this is more about the, how can you collect this data to then tell your story that is on data that you don't have. Depending on, you know, interviewing people, surveying people, there are advantages and disadvantages to all of these. You know, surveying, you can often get a lot more people. You can do online surveys, in-person surveys. Interviews are more about, you know, sitting down with a handful of people and learning a lot more than you can collect in a survey. And then that last row is really just kind of looking at, you know, what's been going on. And it's not, that time graph isn't necessarily an evaluation, but thinking about, you know, what always happens right before school starts, or are we having problems when the 6th graders are let out at the same time as the 8th graders and they're converging in the hallway? And, you know, it sounds kind of petty, but at the same time, it's narrowing down that here's where our problem is, and here's what we need to focus on with future strategies. James, any other thoughts on any of these as well?
No, I think this is awesome. I just, one other tidbit is maybe having whoever's writing your grants also in the field and talking and asking these questions in other way and back and forth, because, you know, they might be just looking at the standard list of grants that they've always applied to. But if they're talking with you or talking, you know, with your law enforcement partner who's running this restorative justice program, or your mental health clinician, and really understanding, hey, you know, I'm seeing this many students, but I have a caseload that's out the wazoo. those are important tidbits for a grant writer to know, so that he or she or they can then look to other sources of funding to address that gap that you all have identified.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And even, a lot of times it's someone sitting in an office and not only going out there and talking to different people, but walking around the school or going to the areas to really truly understand. I mean, with, Google Earth and Google Photos and all that, we can get some sense of that, but nothing beats walking around a place and talking to the people that are involved in the actual activities. So that kind of leads us to, well, then let's use this data we've collected to tell our story. And so first question, what are you trying to measure? And so instead of trying to hit everything, really focus on, well, we have safety issues. And then, this is what the data tells us about safety, versus if the goal is to do better staff development, then your data should reflect that, because that's what you're going to have to measure to get the grant, but ultimately measure to do your assessment and report out on your performance and performance measures. Student training. So it's kind of a combination of, but thinking about, again, you don't want to just say, we're going to offer 10 trainings to students or to staff. You want to say, these are what the trainings are going to accomplish, because here's where we see a need. We're going to do X, and then we can ultimately show the same data to say that we improved. Back to that, at what unit are you measuring? Talking about individuals and saying 40% of our students or 80% of our staff, versus we're going to make these improvements to the overall schools or to the 6th grade or to the 9th grade or whatever the case might be. That third big question, are the data sets available on a continuous basis? And that's why I asked a little bit with Rebecca on the surveys, that if you're applying for a grant, but you're not able to collect that same data till 3 years later, you have to take that into consideration. So some of your data you might be able to report out on a monthly or a quarterly or even an annual basis. But other data, such as not survey like climate surveys, but if you're going to go out and interview or survey people or put up something online and get feedback, that's something that you can anticipate doing again, but that's not something that you can report out necessarily on a monthly basis unless you're going to be able to get that continuous feedback. So thinking about not only what data do you have when you apply, but can you use this as part of the continued funding and your measures at the end? And then lastly, what resource gaps or opportunities have you identified? In a lot of funding, they want to hear that, we already know we need this training, or we already know. And, again, having worked with police more than most other types of organizations my whole career, every person says, we need more cops. I go out into the public and they say, we need more cops. I just set that aside. Think about what other things that we can do so we don't have to necessarily, because we don't have the resources oftentimes to hire people, just hiring people doesn't always answer those questions or fix those problems.
And one thing that we didn't throw on there too are some of your policies and protocols that you might be creating. So, I know in one of the districts we were talking about that when a person is expelled, there is an opportunity for that individual to come back at another point in time, but there's not necessarily a process, a regular standardized process of all right, who needs to engage that individual and what needs to happen before that student returns back to school. So, if there's a policy or protocol that you are creating through this funding, how has that impacted your work? So that's another piece in there that we can add to it.
Thanks, James. And then my last two slides are, how to use those data and stats and charts. Benefits are huge. So, as a reviewer of lots of different grants, and as Leonora said, she was a grant reviewer, there are things that I definitely, as an analyst, look for. And, so there are bad charts out there, or charts that just don't tell the story. So you definitely want to include some graphs, charts, stats. It is a benefit unless it's obvious that you just pulled something from an old report and threw it in there. And that's the challenge lots of different challenges, but thinking about like the chart on the top, that is evident that if you're comparing rural, suburban, and urban schools, that rural schools have the most need out of there. So that's one way to say if it's rural related funding, to be able to show that you have more need than perhaps suburban or urban agencies. The one on the bottom is showing, over time and thinking about, how have things changed and identifying those needs. Even better, and this is the challenge in both of them, in the top one, does it vary by school or by grade within there? In the bottom one as well. And so, we often group all non-white together, but in certain school districts, we have predominantly certain ethnicities that have much more of a need. And you want to use that to think about, is there unique funding for that unique need instead of just the generic school related funding. And then lastly, again, just a couple more examples of the one on the left is I would look at it and say, well, that's nice, but how does that compare? How has that changed? What is specific within these areas? And versus the one on the right is very specific about the different places within Colorado, how they've changed and how they differ. If you see all 4 lines or all 10 lines all going up or all going down, it's not as evident that your jurisdiction, your district, your school has more need than others or has gotten worse over the years compared to others.
Yeah, and I really wanted to throw these two in because I've seen the one on the left was actually in a final report for a community. And I went back to them. I'm like, that does not really tell me anything. Like, how many people live in these neighborhoods? What is the time period? I mean, is this a year? Is this several years? Is this a month? What is the change over time? Like, so things like that are definitely on your don't list. And on the one on the right, what I think is really helpful for you all is that it's over time. So you can see the changes over time, but there's also kind of like a baseline marker. So we're seeing what it's like on Colorado versus specific cities. And this might be something that you could do with your school. So, throughout the school, bullying rates are, going up and down. The school district, and then your middle school, this, Smith Middle School. What is it, the change over time in the middle school? What is it versus all of our other middle schools? And then, if you want to even make it even better, you can put in like, all right, this is the year that we created this program, and this shows how the change occurred since we implemented that program. And that can also help you sustain a program because it shows, hey, we implemented this program and it had a dramatic impact on bullying rates versus the schools where we didn't implement it. So it could also be a tool for you all to say, hey, maybe this program isn't working the way we expected. If it didn't have a change, that raises more questions for you. Say, hey, maybe we're not implementing it correctly, or maybe we're not engaging the students that we need to engage to have this program be most effective. So, as you move forward, Julie is an amazing resource that is available to all of your sites. So if you have questions about how to use data, feel free to ask either me, LeVar, or Matt. Say, hey, can we get connected to Julie, and we'll have you get connected with her free of charge to you. So with that, thank you so much, Julie. There's her information, and then we're gonna kick it over to Sandra. Thank you, Julie.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, can you see me?
Yes.
Okay, great, because I can't see you. So I apologize. I'm traveling today. So I'm going to do my best to work with what I have right here. So James, if you want to jump in, please, just jump in at any
Sure.
point. So so my name is Sandra Espadas, and today I'm going to be talking to you about non-traditional funders that can help you continue some of the work that you've been able to start with this grant. I think for the most part, when we think of funders, we primarily tend to focus on like state and federal funding. But there are other potential funders that can help you move different pieces of your overall work. Maybe they might not fund, everything, but as it was mentioned previously, you might be able to kind of identify different, areas that maybe one hospital can fund and maybe a different entity can fund. So within counties, there are different departments that have similar goals as schools. And so I'll get a little bit more into detail about that and highlight a specific examples. But some of those departments include transportation, planning departments, and the public health department. Similarly with the cities, specifically, cities have the community development block grant programs. This is funding that is spaced to address broad issues around community development, social services, public health, law enforcement, and it's principally to benefit low and moderate income individuals. The funding is available once a year, and it's usually around this time that the city are engaging with community partners to better understand the needs of the community and potentially include them as part of the recommendations for funding. So this might be a good time for you to engage with your cities if you haven't done so. Then we have our foundations. This is like your Robert Wood Johnson foundations. So a lot of them have, different guidelines in terms of who they fund. And they address a variety of issues. And then, we all have banks in our community, JP Morgan Chase, Union Bank, Citibank, Wells Fargo, they all have foundations, and, it might be good to kind of build a relationship with them and start a conversation specifically through a local branch. Hospitals are another big one. They sometimes have foundations that are centered around the social determinants of health. Some hospitals tend to focus on workforce development, while others on health, which does include mental health of students and parents. So that might be a good resource. Next slide, please. Oh, no, I think you went a little bit too far.
I went back.
Okay.
Did I? Yeah.
No, I thought we were gonna do Lompoc.
Oh, sorry. Maybe I didn't switch it.
Yeah, you didn't switch it. Yeah. So I
My
just want to
fault.
give it, it's okay, don't worry. So I just want to give an example of some of the work that we've been able to do with Brian and his team. So recently they've been working on safe passages to and from school, specifically to address fights that were taking place outside of the school campus. And so our team actually has a previous working relationship with the County Association of Governments. So we basically just reached out to them and we said, hey, do you have a safe routes to school program specifically in this area? So then they were actually able to connect us to Coast. They told us that they were doing some work around this and that they might be a good resource. So then we gave that connection to Brian and his team, and they were actually working on a grant application that focused on the infrastructure piece, which was a plus. But there was also a community education side to that grant. And so they were able to include a piece of the work that Brian was trying to identify funding for. So it was a specific position within their target area. So this is just a very high level example of, how we were able to engage a county transportation department in the school safety work. Next slide, please. So I think, traditionally we don't think of these departments as partners in our work, but it's important that we do because they're the ones that are designing specifically how people and the environment interact. So not only are they looking at like the locations of bus stops, but where buildings should go, crosswalks and so on, but the field of planning requires municipal agencies to be intentional to promote better health and social outcomes, which definitely aligns with the goals of school districts. So I think that there's an opportunity to kind of create synergy and enhance your work if you are able to engage with your local planning and or transportation department. So these are just some very high level plans that I would encourage you to do some research on, or ask your coalition partners or cities if they know anything about. The Vision Zero plan is a strategy to eliminate all fatalities and severe injuries while increasing safe, healthy, and equitable mobility for all. The active transportation plans identifies locations for bike and pedestrian needs in different regions, counties, and cities. And then, as I mentioned, there's the Safe Routes to School programs. It's a nationwide that really creates safe, active transportation routes for children to and from school. So, this includes pedestrian network improvements, that would help facilitate kids getting to and from school, that could fund improvements such as infrastructure, lighting, but also educational programs outside of school settings. Next slide, please. So why would they do this? Well, it just improves health outcomes in general. The transportation plans and pedestrian plans lead to improved safety and accessibility of school vicinity. It benefits everyone. So it's important that we are involved in these conversations and make the connections to the work that you're doing, because these entities are not on the ground like you are. So you are the experts in your community and can help inform things that maybe are not coming up in the data that they're pulling for their specific region. So for the next couple of slides, I'm going to be focusing a little bit more on potential funders for each of the sites. I did some quick research, and I apologize in advance if you already have them at the table as a funder, but I wanted to leave you with something tangible, potential funders that you might be able to reach out to in your respective communities.
And
Next
Sandra,
slide.
before you get to that, Sandra is also one of our subject matter experts. So if you want to learn more about some of these organizations and how do you connect with them to potentially access some of their resources, grant opportunities, let us know. We'll definitely get you connected. And I think, this is, I love these slides that are coming up because they're out of the box thinking. In a couple of the conversations that we had in your schools, one of the things that we keep hearing over and over is that your administrators just don't have time for one more meeting, or it's just that there's so many things that are piling up. So having your grants team and your administration and staff who are making connections with other folks outside of your school district to be able to bring them in to support your work, is a really, really great opportunity for you all. I think one of the main purposes of this grant program is to help you all think out of the box. How do we utilize community partners and bring them into our schools to support our work?
Yeah, and I think that, it's important, as what Julie was sharing earlier, that you really have a story, you have your data, you have, everything organized before you approach, potential partners and funders. So just, being mindful of that. So let's start with Texas. So these are just, county, hospital, and local foundations that I was able to identify. For the hospital, they focus on resilient children and healthy women and girls. And so again, the categories are very broad, very good opportunity to kind of start engaging them in a conversation. The Community Foundation is a grant-making public charity dedicated to improving the lives of people in a specific region and beyond. And so as long as your targeted area falls within their specific region, then, there's a good chance in making sure that it's aligned and we're able to kind of tie the story to the region that they're funding. So the public health, they provide funding to CBOs to ensure well-being of everyone to reach their potential. They're seeking to fund evidence-based, research-based, or promising to support birth to old age. So again, very broad categories that provide an opportunity for you to engage with these departments, even to ask your coalition members if they are at the table, and maybe they're connected to one of them. And so let's go to Washington for the next one. So Providence Hospital. So they have priority areas that focus on health and removing barriers to care, community resilience, which is very broad, and innovating for the future. And Innovia Foundation, again, they partner with communities to improve education, preserve the environment, promote the arts, and improve the quality of life for everyone. So again, provides a good opportunity, if you haven't already, to kind of engage in. For the city piece, they actually have a interesting commission that's focused on transportation. And they consider safety for street users, and they have funding specifically on violence prevention programs and CDBG funding. So again, good opportunity to kind of engage in that conversation. Pennsylvania, so again, we have a health department. They don't necessarily provide direct funding, but they do support different events and nonprofit organizations throughout the region. There's also a planning department. They recently developed a sustainability plan that affects positive change in communities throughout the region. One of their goals is to integrate with livable communities, focused not only on transportation services, but also on streetscape design. So again, how do we make those streets safer? Are they, engaging them in the conversation? Are they targeting any of the communities that you're working in? And what's being considered for your community? Does it align with what you're seeing on the ground?
Yeah, that's a good opportunity to also to engage students. Like, all right, where do you not feel safe on the way to school? And then, being able to utilize your young people's experiences to be able to apply for funding.
Yeah, that's a good point, James. A lot of these transportation plans do require, actually all of them require community input. And they do seek residents and sometimes teachers, students to kind of do walking studies to help inform some of the improvements that they want to make and to make sure that it's aligned. So, just again, being mindful of what the work is that's happening in your community and how do you leverage that. So Florida, there's a community foundation that's focused, include education and youth. They also focus on racial justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. The health system, their community health needs assessment priorities, they include community education and mental health, among other items. But just a key thing on health systems is that they are required to do a community health needs assessment. So I think this is on a yearly basis, at least it is here where I'm at, but that's a good opportunity to kind of inform, if, even if they don't provide funding, but at least, be able to provide input in terms of, where the needs are in your community and making sure that your input from your parents, your teachers is also being considered as part of their needs assessments that are required. The city, they are actually in the process of obtaining input into their community investment plan for 2023 that's going to run through 2027. And this includes funding for community safety. So right now, the majority of the funding is allocated to the police department, but there are a few programs that include reestablishing neighborhood action teams that might be a good resource, as well as activating public spaces such as parks and security services in partnership with the school board for playground use. So again, figuring out, do these neighborhood action teams align, within your target area? If not, how can we get one started so that we can focus more resources outside of the school that's being targeted?
That's a great one too. That's a great one too, because I think a lot of you have said that one of our major challenges is that there's not places for young people to go in our communities. So, being aware of these opportunities, and you can say, hey, our students are saying that after, 4 o'clock, there's not a safe place for us to go. So, having a voice at the table, you are schools, you see these young students every single day, being able to incorporate what you are hearing into the city leadership demonstrates to the students, to the parents, and to the community, hey, we're hearing what you all are saying, and we want to help create safe spaces.
Yes, very good point. South Carolina, so there's the Foundation for the Carolinas. They support programs in 13 county service areas. That includes Lancaster. They currently administer 22 grant programs, each with their own priorities and requirements. So I would encourage you to visit their website for more information. The county council also has various different commissions. One of them is specifically health and wellness, and they're concerned with matters of health and well-being of the community. They do have a 7-member membership that includes 1 representative from the school district. So it might be good for you to kind of figure out, like, who is our representative from the school district that sits at this table, because they do have funding, and they identify health issues and coordinate existing services or establish additional services and programs to meet the needs of the community. I also came across the Grant Makers Network. They have over 500 foundations that are helping to meet critical needs and improving quality of life. According to their website, it states that they are the only forum for sharing information and promoting cooperation among the region's grant makers. So let's move to California. So I'm gonna
skip Lompoc since you're with them. I want to make sure we keep like 10 minutes for question and answer.
Okay.
So we'll
That's fine.
skip them and then go right to Laconia.
Okay, so let's go to New Hampshire. So the hospital, that might be a good partner to engage as well. They just completed their most recent community health needs assessment report. Laconia specifically identified public safety as one of the main concerns that should be addressed as part of that report. So kind of figuring out, what is it exactly that the hospital is wanting to do around public safety? Is there an opportunity to engage in the conversation to support some of the work that you've started and being able to show success? Some of the information that Julie was talking about, the data that says, hey, look, we've already been doing something, are you interested in helping us continue the work? We need some more funding. The city might also be a good resource to explore. They have CDBG funding as well, and the Partnership for Public Health. They actually have a community health improvement plan with a vision to build a healthy, resilient, and vibrant community for everyone and family. Their council is tied to the community health needs assessment that was done actually by the hospital. So all of these entities are kind of like intertwined to each other and helping to support, the region and kind of leverage resources. So that, again, is a good opportunity to also be at the table if you're not already there. Do you want to go back to? Okay. Do you want to go California? I don't know if Lompoc is here or Pico Rivera.
Yeah, you're tied with them. You can give them
Okay.
their own.
Okay,
Yep.
sounds good. Thank you.
I'll leave about 10 minutes for Q&A for folks. So for the folks that are on the call, on the webinar, do you have some specific programs and or strategies or policies that you want to ensure is sustained, and you have any questions about how do we go about making sure that they are continued past the grant program?
James, I have a quick question. It might not be about that, but I was curious at the end of the grant and everything, like maybe next summer, June, July, will we be able to maybe work with or connect with Julie or with y'all to look at some data and to really build the story? I mean, I know we have different teams and stuff in our district, but could we reach out to?
Absolutely. Yeah. So a couple of things of note. One of the things that we, the LISC team want to do are to create, like a 1 or 2 page like highlights of every single site. So we're going to work with you to help build and design that out. We'll also have conversations with you to think about, what is your sustainability plan? And, as I mentioned before, both Julie and Sandra are both resources available to you. Just let us know, what you need from them, and we will make sure we get you connected with them.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Anyone else have questions around sustainability? I'm going to throw one out to you all. What are your key partners in your school that you utilize for sustainability? So if you're going to sustain a program in your school, like who are the main individuals? Are they in your school, your actual school, or is it in administrative, so more school wide, if that makes sense?
Ours would be the Office of Research and Development in the school district, because they write a lot of the grants, and they implement programs, all the grant programs throughout the school district. So.
So it's mostly districts that are helping you out? Is that for everyone?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I thought you meant, I might have misunderstood the question, but no, I thought you were saying, for sustainability of the programs in the school, who do you look at to the school district? So that's why I misunderstood you. So, but yeah, no, so we do have other outside entities. We have other grants, for continuation. We do have some local foundation funding, Eris Foundation as well, to add to that presentation. So yeah. But the research and development, they're like, the research and development for our school district is basically the conduit for all external grants for the school district. They're the ones who do the applications as well as the reporting, so, and implementation and everything.
So I'm gonna use an example. When we were meeting with Rebecca in Austin, one of the principals there was asking a really great question, and she was saying, if we want to continue a program or start a program in our school, like, can we even do that? Like, what do we do with, can our grants team do that, or does our grants team have to fund something that's universal across all of our schools? Rebecca, if I screwed up that question, let me know. But I thought that was a really interesting question that she asked. And I would say, reach out to all of your principals and make sure that they are aware of, if there's something that is missing in their specific school, can they apply for funding through the school system for that individual school? So I'm almost thinking too, when we were in Laconia, there was a specific middle school where they were like, oh, if we could have some of these supports in our school, that would be really helpful. So, understanding whether or not an individual school within a school system can apply for funding is something that might be, valuable lessons for principals and assistant principals in schools.
We've had in our school district, our schools have a huge range of demographics, and it seems like the schools that we're focusing a lot of our energy on are 3 of the 4 failing schools in the school district, or not. I'm sorry, they're not technically failing. They are under unsatisfactory performing, according to state standards and in South Carolina. And so we're trying to, look at things, how various programs in the past have not worked there because it's continuing the same, obviously the same various programs or lack of engagement or whatever it is continuing in the same trajectory. So we're trying to do different things all at the same time. Other school board representatives representing other districts look at it like that district is getting more funding again, or that not district, but that that zone or whatever is getting more funding again. So you have to be, it's sort of a tightrope, because it's sort of a other people can get jealous if a lot of your efforts go to one school, but at the same time, a rising tide lifts all boats sort of concept. So, it would be good. So that's we're always like sort of walking that fine balance,
Yeah, and I think that's where the data is really important to know,
Right.
is a program succeeding or not succeeding? And so if there's a specific school that's getting more resources than another, like one middle school is getting more resources than the other middle school to address a problem or a challenge, and they're not seeing significant impacts of that program, then hopefully, the administration within that one middle school is then asking questions and trying to understand, why this program is not having the impact it should. So, it's not only helpful as far as sustainability planning, but also decision making. Do we have the right staff implementing the program? Do we have the right students as part of the program? Are we doing it at the right times? Do we need to have parents more involved in the process? So it's also a way to ask a number of follow-up questions within your team to figure out, why it's working or why it's not working. And I see, Rebecca, you had a couple of comments in there that you've had teachers getting classroom-specific grants to continue the work. That's really neat. You want to talk a little bit more about that? I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you want to, fine. If not, that's all right too.
I put it in the chat because I didn't want to take up all the space in the room. But yeah, we've had some teachers that have continued some stuff just in their classrooms with different grants, and some campuses like ALC just got a $2,500 grant for some SEL and CPNI work. And then we always have different departments that are helping us and supporting us doing the work. Like I'm thinking of our counseling department and MTSS and SEL and CPNI. Those are some pretty big ones that are already invested in it and continuing it. And our Office of Innovation and Development, that's always looking for new funding for us to continue. And there's so many different pieces to our grant. So they're always looking at like what could fit.
Yeah, and as you look at your programs over time, I'm even thinking like in El Rancho, where you all have law enforcement officers that are helping run specific programs. A lot of folks are questioning, like, does it make sense to have law enforcement working with students? If it's really working positively, let's tell that story. And it's also, I think, really interesting too, as you move forward, if you have a different officer that comes in and the results kind of go different way, what can we learn about the quality of the officers, and what do they bring to the table that can help provide a more beneficial experience for the students? And the students can also help you tell that story, that Officer A was very engaging versus Officer B, who didn't seem to actually care about us. Sandra, I see you have some thoughts about this program.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, James, that I think it's also like you're talking about, like you have like different school districts have different departments that completely focus on the grant writing piece. I think that's great, but I think that there's also a relationship piece with a lot of the funders, specifically with the banks and some of the foundations, where they need to have a relationship with you in order to fund you. They want to know who you are. They want to know the work that you're doing, how it's progressing. So even if they don't fund you, like, I don't know, $30,000 for the first year, they may, start with like $2,000, $5,000 or something. They want to see some sort of progression. Like, what is it exactly that you're able to do with these $5,000? How are you leveraging this, and how are you still doing the work that you need to do with the little money that we're providing, where we started a relationship with the bank. It took us 2 years, and we started with $100,000, and then and when again they renewed again for $100,000, and then on the 3rd year they came back and they said, okay, we're going to set aside $500,000, and now that's where the money's coming in, because we've been engaging them in the conversations, keeping them informed. And so I think that's an important piece to kind of keep in mind, that a lot of these non-traditional funders outside of state and federal resources, it's not just about the writing piece, it's also about the relationship.
Yeah, relationships matter. Well, very good. Thank you all for joining us on this webinar. Again, we'll post it in the upcoming days. And if I don't see you before then, have a great end of the year, and we'll see you next year. Take care, y'all.
Thanks, James.
Thank you.